Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out this late in the afternoon. What's been interesting about being the last presentation of the day is seeing everyone else's presentations first, and kind of everyone's data journeys have been like super similar, which I find really interesting. But hopefully I'll have some different things to talk about as well. So, quick intro on myself. My name's Adam. I've been at Carsales for about the last 4 years. Currently, I'm the data engineering lead, and the other role I perform is the lead of the analytics the analytics engineering chapter. That's something I'll talk a bit later on. So what I'll be discussing today, I'll start with a bit of background on Carsales and the kind of history of the data team and how we've been changing, some of the challenges we've been facing in data engineering, what we've been working on in the past year and a half, what things look like for us going forward, the analytics engineering chapter, like I mentioned, and then I'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So, most people are pretty familiar with Carsales as an online marketplace for buying and selling cars. Something that I wasn't really as familiar with until I joined the company is that we have a ton of other brands within Australia, kind of covering the full spectrum of different ways of getting around. But even beyond that, we've got quite a number of businesses internationally as well, so presence in like North America, South America, and Korea even. And these international brands make up about a bit over half of the total Carsales business. So that's pretty cool. All right. So coming to the data team. So when I first joined, like I said, about 4 years ago, we had these different data teams that were kind of embedded in different parts of the business. And the situation that led to was kind of these data silos. So the teams operated pretty independently of each other. They had their own engineers, data scientists, data analysts, and there was no real communication. And so, yeah, the data silos was a pretty significant issue that we were facing. From kind of like an architectural perspective, it got a bit messy. We had a number of different data platforms going. Different tools and processes for moving the data about, and the platforms somewhat serve different purposes, but there was a lot of duplication going on there. And so where that kind of led us a couple of years ago, about two and a half years ago, we moved into a centralized data team structure. So we kind of brought all the different data people from around the business into a single team. We grouped everyone by the disciplines. So I'm one of 2 leads in data platforms and engineering. We generally refer to ourselves as DPE because it's a bit easier to say. But yeah, from a communication perspective, obviously that helps a lot, having everyone working together in a single team. And we have a goal to eliminate the data silos going forward. So moving into some of the challenges that we've been facing with the things I've mentioned, and also moving into a centralized team. So one thing I wanted to think about was, so with that kind of architecture diagram I had up before, looking at it from a different perspective of all the different ways we were doing data transformations that weren't using DBT. So like I mentioned, we had different kind of engineers working on different pipelines, and so we had a kind of a range of different Python code that was orchestrated in a number of different ways, running on cron jobs on Linux and Windows and Airflow, and PySpark code running on EMR, and so very fragmented kind of system. And I would call some of these pretty outdated practices nowadays, or I suppose the other way to look at it was, if I was doing it today, I definitely wouldn't be doing it like this. So, and the other kind of real issue from our perspective in data engineering is it's a lot of maintenance work for us to maintain all of this. A really common scenario, which thankfully we don't face as often these days, but previously was more of an issue, was we'd have a stakeholder come to us and say, oh, our dashboard, hasn't updated for the last 2 weeks, can you look into it? And, we'd have a poor engineer in our team who would have to dig through all these old code repositories and try and figure out which pipeline is populating the table for that dashboard. And so that kind of leads into this other issue as well of having a centralized team becoming a bottleneck. And so any new data requests coming in, we're really relying on having capacity in the team, and when so much of the capacity is taken by all that maintenance work, then we've got less time for doing the more interesting stuff, and the backlog just continues to grow. And the other kind of risk of that is that teams that are waiting for us to do some work will just go and build their own pipelines instead, and then you're just creating another data silo. So where we've been going kind of in the past year and a half, we in the past couple of years, shortly after we centralised the data team, we were looking at the tools we're using, and with all of the things I mentioned, that led to us settling on Snowflake as a platform. The other really important thing that we kind of needed to solve was having a single source of truth for all of our data. And then, as part of that, we, looking at the tools we were using, dbt was a big part of that decision. So just a really high-level view of how, what our data layers in Snowflake look like. We consume all of our data from all of the source systems. We're subscribing to message queues, which are putting JSON payloads into S3, and then from there we're bringing it into our raw layer in Snowflake. So because Snowflake works nicely with semi-structured data, we keep the data in its exact raw form at that layer. Going into the cleanse layer, we're running it through some data quality checks, and also SCD type 2 process, or slowly changing dimensions, so we can maintain that kind of history of changes of the data over time. And then going into the conform layer is where we start doing the transformations. We pull out all the columns we need, flattening the data into tables, and at the same time ensuring those columns have the correct data types, or that kind of stuff. And then the reporting layer is where we are doing our business logic, calculating metrics, aggregating anything for the BI use cases, or ML pipelines, that kind of thing. And so dbt looks after basically those final two layers in Snowflake. So for coming to data mesh now, so obviously that's been a pretty popular topic today. So you get to hear my hot takes on data mesh now. We started thinking about this as we were, doing that initial development on Snowflake. This model is nothing unique. Most people are pretty familiar with the hub and spoke picture of having, a centralized data engineering that builds and governs the platform, and allows teams that own the different data domains to come in and build and own their own data pipelines. However, I wanted to discuss a number of risks or concerns that I think come with this model. So the first one, which has been an issue with Carsales in the past, is we would just go back to data silos. And so, and to prevent that, how do you enforce consistent standards and practices, being followed across the board? And then getting teams to own their own data pipelines can be hard. And then what do you do with data domains that don't have a single owner. Sorry, just one sec. I'll try not to choke on it. So I'll go through these one at a time and kind of give you my thoughts. So going back, the risk of going back to data silos. So we're building this new platform on Snowflake. We've put all of the right governance kind of controls in place. We've come up with the tools that we should be using, all the standards. So in theory, at least, we've addressed that. But then, how do you enforce those standards and practices for everyone? And so I think this is where DBT does play a pretty important role. It's commonly said, I've heard it mentioned several times already today, that DBT brings software engineering type practices to data, and all of the kind of Git stuff, version control and reviewing pull requests and all that kind of thing, I think is super important. And obviously you can write up all your documentation, kind of outline your standards, your naming conventions and everything, but I do think there is a lot more to it than that. And I'm going to come to that in a minute, so just hold that thought. And then moving on to the next one of getting teams to own their data pipelines. So there's multiple aspects to this. I think from a technical perspective, what we've done is the part where we're ingesting the data from S3 into Snowflake and those kind of first couple of layers, we're trying to automate that as much as possible. It's still a work in progress, but the idea is that there's like no real technical barriers there. We've kind of built this portal to self-serve that part of it. And then once the data is in Snowflake, you only need DBT, and as we know, DBT is not that difficult to learn beyond knowing how to write SQL queries. So yeah, from a technical perspective, we're doing everything we can to address that barrier. I do believe there's other concerns here that are probably beyond the scope of this talk, but things like teams having conflicting priorities, or not having the capacity to do this work themselves. But yeah, like I said, technically we can address this. And then what do we do with the data domains that don't have a single owner? And this is where I think things get a bit more interesting, where what we've landed on is kind of our core data pipelines that we know get used by multiple teams across the business. We'll still build those ones and retain ownership. And so we're doing this hybrid data mesh where we're still somewhat centralized, but also still having the platform as a self-service tool that other teams can still use for their own purposes. And so coming to the analytics engineering chapter now. So a couple of slides back I mentioned that I had more to say about how you maintain those standards and practices that everyone follows. And this is where so the thinking I had on this was that you need to find a way to keep kind of open and ongoing communication with everyone that does this work. It's one thing to document how you should be doing all these practices, but if you just do that and then give people the tools and say, go off and build your pipelines now, you find over time things start to deviate a bit, and then you do just go back to data silos again. And so what we've done, after kind of chatting to a couple of people, we created this analytics engineering chapter, which is essentially it's not a formalized team in the business, but it's a group of anyone that does analytics engineering work. And we don't actually have anyone with the job title of analytics engineer at Carsales, but we have a lot of people that do that work. So that's everyone in my team in data engineering, and also includes data analysts that have been upskilling to work with DBT. And anyone that we've been onboarding as part of our data mesh that will also be using DBT, so everyone's kind of part of the same group. The most successful part of it so far has been these regular catch-ups that we do. So on a fortnightly basis, we all get on to a meeting, usually over Zoom, and just chat about DBT generally. We sometimes have a more formal agenda, or sometimes we've had people kind of do showcases of interesting models that they've been building, or we chat about the latest features we've been implementing into our projects. Sometimes we don't have an agenda at all, and someone just starts talking about an issue that they've got, and conversations just lead from there. And I think the really cool thing about this is it just gets everyone talking about this on a regular basis. Everyone's on the same page, and like I said, it's just about having a consistent approach to the way we're building our data models. This one's a bit unrelated, but I think on the same topic of communication. So the other thing that we've started doing in the past year is basically just talking to other businesses a lot more about the way they're operating. Like I mentioned at the start, Carsales has a number of businesses internationally. They operate pretty independently of us, so they've got their own data teams and everything. And when we've had these conversations, we've realised that teams are at different stages of their journeys, and so we've had things to learn from other teams. They've had things to learn from us. And on a similar note, where Carsales' head office is in Melbourne, in the suburb of Carbone, we've got a number of other tech companies. It's kind of like a little tech hub, and we've had some really cool chats with like knowledge sharing sessions that we've run with different businesses. And we've even made significant architectural decisions on our platform just from these conversations. So I think this is just like a pretty important point to make. Even events like this, it's super useful. So kind of wrapping up with some final thoughts. Looking back to kind of where we were a year ago to today, we did have like 100% of our engineering work in the data platforms and engineering team, and today half of our users on DBT are outside of the DBT team now. So that's gone a really long way to kind of eliminating, well, I wouldn't say eliminating, but reducing the impact of having our team as a bottleneck for engineering work. We've gone from starting out on this Snowflake and data mesh journey to having a lot of our major pipelines on there now, and we're now have onboarded or onboarding more teams on data mesh. We've and all of that, those maintenance issues, like of those legacy systems that I mentioned at the start, that's still there, but it's significantly reduced. We've moved some of those pipelines to DBT, which just means they're super easy to fix if there are any issues. And the other thing I wanted to mention, so I've been to a number of sessions where people have kind of had this debate of should we have a centralized data team or decentralized, and it's always portrayed as this binary choice. And I've kind of only, I don't know, maybe a lot of people already knew this, but I've only really come to the realization fairly recently that it doesn't need to be one or the other. You can kind of have something in between, which is where we've landed. And it's been constantly evolving for us as well. And so kind of the way I see it is, it really depends on different business needs. You'll have different requirements for this, and so everyone's going to fall in different places on that spectrum, I suppose. That's basically, I've just realised I've gone really fast on that, so I'll have heaps of time for questions after this if anyone wants to come and ask or just chat in general. Thanks so much.